Welcome. Wow, this was an unexpected turnout. I was actually afraid that putting the word recruitment in the title would give me basically an empty room, except for my two colleagues here who basically have to come because they're nice. My name is Johan Öbrink. I work at a company called iTeam, and when we describe what we do, we say that we digitalize companies and organizations through strategy, code, and culture. Now, my job is some of the strategy, almost none of the code, but a lot of the culture, which means that I get to spend my spare time coding instead, so I don't lose the edge. So when I say culture, basically what I do is I help companies change the way they work. And that means stuff like how can they produce better systems, less bugs, shorter time to market, cooler features, continuous delivery maybe. But the interesting thing about this is that every time I come to a company and I talk to the developers, they actually already know these things. It's not like I'm there to teach them anything new. They already know what they should be doing, it's just that they don't do it. And usually, actually, the strategy documents of the company state that they should be doing the things that they know are correct, but still they don't. Which begs the question, why? Why do they tell me stuff well, it's good enough, I guess, or I just follow the specifications, or the project ends in 3 weeks, then it's up to maintenance. Or, well, at least we made it on time and on budget. And then when you suggest to them that they actually follow through on what they already believe and start working in a different way, the answer is always, that's impossible. And that's always seemed weird to me, because this is how I got into programming. This is a VIC-20. It was an amazing machine. This was in 81 or 82. I was 8 years old. So the specs of this machine were, it's a 1.1 megahertz 8-bit processor, 20 Ks of ROM, which was basically filled with the basic interpreter, and then I had 5 Ks of RAM to work with. And when I first sat down and started playing with this awesome machine, my reaction was this. It was so amazing. I could accomplish anything. I could change the world. There was no limit to what I could do with this thing. And I guess that a lot of you can remember that feeling from the first time you ever tried to program. So how come that we went from being these all-powerful beings to disillusioned whiners? Well, I think that partly it's our own fault. And when I say ours, I mean ours as an industry. Because at some point in time, we started to behave like we're so special, and everyone else was just too stupid to understand. We didn't want to share the secrets. And what happened was that the black magic started to become treated as raw material, and we were reduced to resources. So mistakes were made. And if we look at companies today, I can see 3 major classes of mistakes that they make: structural, interpersonal, and cultural. So let's look at the structural mistakes. The title of this talk actually stems from a conversation I had with a woman at a bank that I worked with 2 years ago. And they had problem recruiting new people. There were people, but they couldn't find the right people. And so she basically asked me, what would it take for you to start working here as an employee? And I said, well, that's impossible. And she goes, why? Because of your firewall rules. And she's like, what? What has the firewall got to do with you working here? Well, basically what they have done, and a lot of companies have done this, is that they have these sensitive assets that they need to protect. So what they do is they put a firewall around those. And then they place all the developers on the inside of that firewall. And that now makes us all security hazards. Okay? So we need to handle that in some way. So what do? Well, we give the IT department the job of deciding what we can and cannot do. So I cannot install any software on my machine. IT has to do that because they need to know that it's safe. Now, that quickly becomes a major problem for IT if they can't standardize what we're working on. So what they do then is they lock down what computers I can use, and they lock down what programs I can use. And that's why I would never start working there, because I would never work anywhere where I cannot pick my own tools and where I'm not an administrator on my own machine. So this basically means that the people that you can recruit are, well, there are some people that you can recruit despite of these things, but you run quite a high risk of recruiting people who are just complacent, that just think that, oh, that's okay, I don't care. And you don't want people that don't care. So the second thing, the interpersonal thing, the days of the lone genius are over. The developer ninja that could solve anything. We're moving into a territory now where problems are so complex and so dependent on an ever-changing market that no one person can solve the problems themselves. So in the bad old days, you could have this genius who was like 10 times or 20 times better than all their colleagues, which basically meant that it doesn't matter how they behave because they're too important. They can be an asshole, we don't care because they deliver. But now, when you're working in teams with a lot of diverse experiences coming from different areas in the business, there is no way that the lone genius can offset the value of all these other people that behavior tends to push away. Also, if we look at the software industry, the growth of developers throughout the years has been so fast that just mathematically we have somewhere around 5% seniors and 95% juniors in the business. Which essentially means that every hour spent by a senior programmer coding instead of mentoring is a loss. And the third part is the cultural. This is a picture of me getting a tattoo in Las Vegas. And it took quite a long time. And I was talking to the guy, the tattoo artist, and he started telling me about when he got into the business. Or it wasn't actually a business, it was a passion. He wanted to be a tattoo artist. He was so interested in it. He learned everything. And then he said, with sadness in his voice, that tattoo industry is nothing like that now. Now people get into the business because of the money. And I said, well, that actually sounds a lot like my experiences of being a programmer. Because when I was on the VIC-20 or the Commodore 64, there were very few of us. And we were incredibly passionate. And then it became an industry. And I didn't I couldn't feel the connection with a lot of the people who came in there, just basically saying, well, I make a lot of money doing this. Or like people asking on Quora, like, what technology should I learn if I want a high salary? So, but what he told me then was what happened in the tattooing industry was that they started forming subcultures. And I think this happens every time that a subculture moves into mainstream culture, is that you will start forming new subcultures. So he said that the way that you could distinguish a real tattoo artist from the other ones was not based on the fact that they were tattoo artists. It was based on what cars they drove, what guns they shot, what music they listened to. Those were the culture markers of a real tattoo artist. And I said, oh, that's so funny, because it's actually the same in programming. I would say that the prime marker of a real programmer is that they like zombies. Now this was of course before zombies moved into mainstream culture as well, so now we have to choose other things. But it means that the choices that you make when you choose what technologies to explore actually sends out information to other people of who you are. So if you look at stuff like, say, React or Vue versus Angular, There's a technical decision in there, but there's also a cultural decision. You need to start looking at what people are using React and Vue and Angular, and which people do you want to ally yourself with. Should you use REST or GraphQL? Well, it's not just a technical decision, because you're always communicating cultural markers. So, as I said before, one of the problems was that we pushed people away. We thought that we were so special and everyone else was too stupid to understand. And I think that if we want to change this, because this has to come from us, because we actually have the knowledge, if we want to change this, we need to start changing our language. Because it turns out that in order to explain anything to anyone, you first need to understand where they come from and what their values are and how they view the world. So let me try to do that. This is how I would explain why we need to change the way we work to a business person. So, something is happening in the world. The first thing is digital transformation. Now, there's been a sort of interchangeable use of digital transformation and digitalization. I like to separate them, and I describe it like this. So you have a company, the company you're at present. They are right in the middle of the market, which is this pink square. And that's why they're successful, because they meet the demands of the market. Now what happens is digital transformation. It's a slow, almost imperceivable shift in expectations and defaults. You can see this sometimes, like when we started getting touch screens, and everyone started touching their GPSs in the car, and the screen wouldn't respond. That's a change in the default, it's a change in expectations. But nothing has happened on the market yet. This is a slow process. This takes years. But then we get a new player in the market who places themselves right in the middle of the new expectations. And then we get a violent shift. That's not a slow process. That's a very sudden process. You can see this when Uber came to your town. People shifted immediately because suddenly someone was answering the questions that they already asked. No one ever said like, oh, this is such an amazing invention. Everyone just said, this is obvious. Why hasn't anyone done this before? And that's why we get the violent disruptions. So that means that now this company that used to be in the middle of the market is actually on the outside, and they're starting to lose customers. They actually might still be growing with the laggards, but they're not moving with the early adopters and the early movers. So what they need to do is move the company into the new market. But what does that mean? Well, for one thing, since they were successful over here, it means that what they're doing is wrong if they want to move over here. They need to change their assumptions. And if they don't, well, they die. So who are these? Basically, the thing I'm saying is that you're going to be disrupted. The only choice you have is if the disruptor is going to be yourselves or someone else. I wrote down disrupt or bankrupt. So let's look at some of these disruptors and what they've done, how they succeeded. So we have Uber, we have Facebook, we have Alibaba, Airbnb, Netflix. Now it's interesting to note, and you've probably already seen this thing before, but it's interesting to note that Uber is a taxi company that has no vehicles, and Facebook is a content provider that provides no content. Alibaba sells hardware but has no inventory. Airbnb has no real estate, and Netflix runs no cinemas. So why were these companies so successful? Well, because the value is in the software interface, not in the products. So let's look at some physical products, some actual physical product vendors, and see what they have done. So we have Sonos, we have Philips Hue, Y-Things that were bought by Nokia, they're called Nokia Health now, and Tesla. These are all material products, but they've realized that the user interface is the primary driver of value. So they made sure that they own the interaction with the customer, and that's why you can buy, you can buy a lot cheaper and better sounding speakers than Sonos, but you probably don't because you just want the Sonos because it's so easy. So let's look at those pure mediator companies from before again. They're all expanding now. They're moving into new areas based on the fact that they own the customer interface and the dominance that stems from those relations. So Uber has moved into Uber Eats, Uber Freight, and they're looking at autonomous vehicles. So then it's not even going to be about the drivers anymore. It's just about the transport. Facebook has started Marketplace. They're going into films and gaming. Alibaba Group are looking at opening malls, like a new generation of malls. And I would say that I wouldn't be surprised if they also move into manufacturing. There's a new technique that they're developing in China now where they can basically reset the production line in 20 minutes instead of 4 hours to be able to produce shorter series of hardware. Which means that Alibaba owning the client could go into manufacturing, but fully automated and on demand. Airbnb are expanding living into experiences and tours. And Netflix has gone into content production. It's actually data-driven content production because they own the customer interface, so they know what you watch, they analyze what you watch, and they create new content based on that. So basically, every company has a choice. They either become a software company so that they can own the digital interface to the customer, or they become a supplier, basically losing their brand. One of the clients we're working with is Taxi Stockholm, and when we started working with them, they were looking at, because their apps sucked, so they were looking at using, I think it was a Danish product, where they got like whole new systems and new apps, and everything would be great except for one minor detail, and that's that you would no longer order a Taxi Stockholm, you would order a drive. So they would lose their brand. They would become a supplier of cars and drivers, not a business that was customer facing. So what does this mean? Well, basically it means that if we're moving into software development, we're going from a support organization. And when we build support systems, it's always measured on cost. How much money do we save by building this support system? But when we're building business system, that makes no sense. Because now we're talking about revenue. It's about return on investment. It's actually not radio on the internet in this case, but it's about ROI. So we need to start measuring differently. But the thing is, we've been working for so many years, basically just building support systems and cutting costs and accepting being replaceable, that I think that we've forgotten how to do stuff. And you can see how organizations and companies treat their employees. Because a lot of the time, they treat us like children. And if we want to attract the best people, and by the best, I'm not saying like the best programmer, I'm saying the people that will help us to change and keep changing and keep learning. If we want to attract those, we need to treat people like adults, like professionals. Because I'm never going to stand for being treated like a kid. And professional means that you know what you're doing. My brother is an electrician. A few years ago, he switched to a new employer. And when he asked them, so when do I get my tools? They said, well, what you do is you go to that store and you buy the stuff you need and it will be invoiced to us. And he goes, okay, cool. So did they have a list or something? And they go, no, you just pick up whatever you want. Oh, you mean like the correct like screwdriver and blah, blah. No, no, no. Whatever you want. You're the expert. You're the professional. You know what tools you need. So you pick them out and then you start working. Now, what this told him was that they respect his competence and they expect his professionalism. Now think about what happens when IT tells you that you can't select anything. They're telling you the opposite. They don't respect your profession and they don't expect you to behave as a professional. And most of us tend to live up to expectations. So we don't. So a professional adult selects her own tools. That's just a part of being professional. Which means that we need to shrink that castle, we need to shrink the firewall, protect the assets on the inside and throw the devs out on the outside. Because then it's not a problem anymore. And it's actually more secure, because if you look at some of those companies that really try to protect their assets, they actually allow npm install, which means that you could basically do anything in a pre-install script. So they're not secure anyway. The second thing is control. Let's see, show of hands. How many of you are using Aggresso as a time reporting system? How many of you are using a different time reporting system? How many of you don't report time? There's a few. The thing is, have you ever tried, all the people who are reporting time, have you ever asked them, like, what analysis do you run on these numbers and what you learn from it? You have? What answer did you get? None? That's always the answer, by the way. I've never ever met anyone who runs analysis on those numbers or learns anything from it. But what I have seen, as I've talked to people about, like, so, you know what needs to be done, why are you not doing it? And they say, because I don't have an Aggresso code for that. So it's actually damaging the business. It's providing no value, and it's damaging the business. And then you ask them, why don't you just get rid of it? And they're like, no, but we need to track how much time people spend on, well, not the stuff, because we don't measure that, but we need to know how much they work. And so I ask, so how do you do it, like, on the business side in the bank? How does the CEO report his time? And they go, well, he doesn't. So how do you know how much he works? And they're like, we don't care. We care about what he achieves. Okay, so why don't we do that with the developers? And then it's like, well, anyway, but if they get sick, we need that time report. And it's like, what about all the other guys? What do they do? Well, they call in sick. So it's just, there's no point ever in reporting time. Oh, wait, if you're a consultant, yeah, right, that's the thing. If you're a consultant, you need to report your time so you know how many hours you need to invoice, except for the fact that it's actually me doing the reporting. So if I wanted to lie, I could lie in the time report and the invoice instead of just in the invoice. So, like, it provides nothing, except for one thing. It tells me that I'm not trusted. Because they want to control me, that means they don't trust me. And if they don't trust me, I will not behave like a professional. So, you need to build your digital brand as a company, because that's what's going to enable survival. And if we look at how you build the digital brand, I would say that number one is that the digital brand is built on GitHub. So if you want to attract good programmers to your company, what they're going to do is they're going to check out GitHub and see what is your company about. So GitHub is not just about sharing code, it's also about telling a story. Even if you don't use the new tools, you can show like when you've been playing around with them, your proof of concepts, the fact that you're trying out new stuff. If you build things and share them with others, you tell them something about the company. You build your digital brand. Whoa. I just lost a line of code there. Oh, there we go. It's about the tech choices. So we did a job for Arbetsförmedlingen, which is a government agency for like providing jobs to people. And this was something called job skills. So it's aimed at newly arrived and refugees who are not yet in the system to help them get onto the labor market quicker. And we built that using, it was React on the user input part and was Vue for the administration interface. And then we used GraphQL for the communication. The backend was in Node. Everything was deployed via Docker. It was, well, almost exactly what you expect a government agency to not do, which actually makes it into a compelling story. Now, I'm not saying that we chose the technology just because it was a cool story, but it was a part of it. Because they have a problem with their organization and they need to change their image. And you can't do that unless you're willing to take risks. So I'm not saying that you should always like jump on the bandwagon and use everything that's cool for now, but I'm saying that you need to change the equation and you have to put some more value on change itself. Because status quo is hurting us. And the digital brand is built bottom up. It's built from us, the developers. We need to step up and build it from the bottom up. So while it's cool that one of our clients actually went to Google to look at their continuous delivery process and how they could improve by learning from Google, it would actually have been even cooler if they realized that some guys in that bank had already done that. If they could just have pointed to those guys and say, look, this was amazing. All the job that you've done. This is the template for us moving forward. By the way, do you want to go to Google and learn some more? Because now all that happened was that they felt undercut. So what you can do is help them by pointing to your colleagues that have done something good and make sure that they get the recognition that they deserve. Because that's how you start building a culture of changing the organization from within. You need to support, we call them pirates, like people who don't ask permission, they just do something. You need to support your pirates. You need to build thought leaders. And you need to mentor your juniors so that everyone can work on the same page. And above all, digital brand is not about IT. Because IT is not a factory. IT is a tribe with certain skills. That's why we do what we do. But what we're building is not systems, it's a digital product, and digital products need to be a priority for the whole business. So if business isn't involved and don't spend time with you, the developers, it will be a shit product. And if they say that they don't have the time to spend with you, it means that the product is not a priority, it's not very important, so it shouldn't be done at all. And if they contest that, you need to push back on them and say, if it is important, then you need to spend time. This is about the survival of the company. So, my favorite quote on how to start change is actually this one. When I was a kid, I used to pray every night for a new bicycle. Then I realized that the Lord doesn't work that way, so I stole one and asked him to forgive me. And it's actually fascinating how, that came in late. So fascinating how many times that works. Because when you do something and it turns out to be the right thing to do, they will not scold you. The problem is when you do something and it turns out to be the wrong thing to do. Because that's when you don't want to apologize. Because this is not about knowing where we're going. This is about trying to find out where we're going, which means that we're going to make mistakes. So if you or anyone around you tries to do something like this, tries to be the pirate, everyone else needs to support those persons. Because there is a high chance they're going to fail, and that's something that we should learn from. And questions? Thank you.